Hello, and welcome to the Redefine Instruction webcast series, where we bring a fresh perspective on learning and development with every single episode. Go ahead, grab a cup of coffee or your favorite drink, and enjoy a few moments talking about L&D with me. Hi, my name is Sandhya Lakhanbal, and I am your host for this series. Subscribe to our webcast or look out for new episodes on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or log on to redefineinstruction.com for the latest trends on L&D. In this episode of Redefine Instruction, I speak with Kimberly Goh about interactive stories and videos. Kimberly is a freelance interactive video designer and e-learning expert. She originally got her degree in computer science from the University of California in Irvine and later returned to UC Irvine to get her certification in eLearning Instructional Design. She's also studied interactive storytelling, and it's this combination of technology and storytelling that is her real passion. Kimberly specializes in creating interactive stories for corporate clients to take their training to the next level. Her interactive videos are different from traditional e-learning. They incorporate action mapping, story arc, motion, graphics, and decision points that lead to behavior change and powerful business results. Kimberly creates interactive videos using many different types of media, including live video footage, animated Vyond videos, still images, and graphics. During this episode, Kimberly talks about how interactive stories differ from traditional stories, designing strategic characters for stories, design story elements, why interactive stories are more successful than others, tools that lend themselves to interactive stories, feedback scenarios, decision points, and adding call to action, building personas, and much more. You can view her portfolio at theinteractivestory.com. She also regularly shares interactive video tips and tools via her YouTube channel, Kimberly Go Interactive. You can find a link to the YouTube channel in the show notes. If you haven't already, you should follow Kimberly's YouTube series on e-learning scenarios video. Find a link to that in the show notes as well. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kimberly Goh. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Redefine Instruction. I'm really excited about this conversation today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much, Sandhya.
Yes, yes. So before we jump into any questions, I really want to kind of know where you're at in your journey. Like, how did you choose instructional design? And then how
hmm
did you transition from instructional design into interactive storytelling?
Yeah. So it has been a journey. So I started out, I had a computer science degree, kind of from a long time ago. And then when I graduated, I did programming because that's what kind of you did back then. And I just didn't like it. So
Mhm.
I ended up and eventually getting into business consulting and, kind of marketing. And I was dabbling in a whole bunch of areas. I ended up in ed tech. That was kind of what I was doing at the time when I made the transition to the e-learning field,
Mhm.
because I realized I didn't really want to be teaching children. That was what ed tech was kind of leaning me towards. I wanted to
Right.
teach adults. I liked education, but it was in this adult space. So that's how I ended up going back to. I went to UCI. They have an e-learning instructional design certification program. I did that, like the whole program, and from that gave me the grounding I needed, because when you have a computer science background, the skill set, but you don't know the tools. And I
Right.
needed to understand, how to use storyline and how, what just kind of the lingo and all of that sort of stuff. But it helped me get started in my freelance career.
Mhm.
And then from there, what happened was I stumbled across Anna Sabramowitz's work in the interactive storytelling uh,
Mhm.
coaching program that she has. And I just, as soon as I saw that, I'm like, that is something I want to do. So I enrolled in her program. I'm actually still involved in her program today. And she taught me how to do interactive storytelling. And that was a real light bulb moment for me, because it went from, I was doing traditional e-learning as a freelancer.
Right.
I was doing traditional e-learning, which is, all over the board. It could
Mhm.
be all different types of things. And I think
Right.
that it was just being able to focus on one type it was scenario building, storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
that really helped me to focus in. And then as I progressed, I realized that my particular skill within that subset, so niching down even further, was video, because I know how to use Camtasia, I know how to use Vyond, and I kind of have the feeling that the world is moving towards video in general.
Right.
You look at it's in social media, it's all over the place. I'm like, well, why not just focus in only on the interactive video piece and then go from there? And it's been that, I'm so glad I did.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was just like a really good fit. And so that's what I do.
What a transition.
Yeah.
And interactive storytelling is such a niche market, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
so targeted. So it's really unknown in the bigger e-learning space.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you a really basic question for the
Sure.
sake of my listeners. Can you define what interactive storytelling is?
Yeah, so I believe that interactive storytelling, at least the way that I have learned it and that I believe it works the best, is when you follow a story arc similar to what you might see in the movie industry today or on Netflix. When you watch a story there, you're not just watching disparate scenarios, right? It's an entire story. It follows what's called the hero's journey, which is, you've got a hero at the beginning and then things aren't good and there's a problem, an inciting incident. And then they, maybe meet a mentor, and it takes them through challenges to a happy ending, I hope, right? At the end, you hope for a happy ending. Well, I mean, that story arc is so perfect for training and development.
Mm-hmm.
Because first of all, the story arc itself is a very natural way for people to engage with any kind of learning. It's what that's the reason why people, when they get home from work, they flip on Netflix, because they want to engage with stories.
Right.
So you already know there's an engagement level that's much higher than point, click, next type of e-learning. It's a very different, it's entertainment based. So that's, I think, to me, that story arc is huge. And then of course there's the whole, you've actually got to be teaching something in addition. It's not pure entertainment. And that's what that meshing of the two is kind of, to me, what interactive storytelling is. Mm-hmm. And if you can include video instead of still images, then it's interactive video, but it's the same story arc in either case.
Yes. And you kind of led into my next question, like why are interactive stories more effective than traditional e-learning? What differentiates them, and why do you get in, get out, deliver what you need to deliver in like a short span, and it's effective and it resonates with the audience?
Yeah. So I think, they say that humans are wired for story. And I believe that it's true because, in the old days, people used to tell stories around the campfire, right? And the stories were the way that people could, in a way, simulate what would happen if they go out and they're, hunting a bear and, the bear turns and attacks. The storyteller tells you, then, you better run because bad things happen if you don't. And so because that has been so ingrained in human history and literature, it's a natural way to learn. And I think that part of the challenge is that when you are learning how to develop e-learning or instructional, you're in the instructional design schools, they don't emphasize story. And so much is lost when you focus in only on just these it's a big information dump.
Right.
And there's very kind of disparate bits of information. It's very lecture oriented, big, long lecture, a bunch of information, like a PowerPoint lecture, followed by a quiz or a knowledge check at the end. And people don't want to learn that way, really. Because when you think about it, nobody would if you turned on Netflix and there was a show that had a long lecture with a quiz at the end, would you watch that show?
I wouldn't last 5 seconds.
No, yeah, you could tell. So when you look at what's working in popular culture, that is the way I believe that training and development should go. That's what we should learn from. Even marketing has learned storytelling is important. I mean, that's why advertising, it's always some kind of a story is in that ad, right? There's always a hero. So we need to learn within the L&D area. We need to learn what works with humans today, rather than this is what I learned, this is how I know it, this is what I was taught, I have to do it this way. So I think there's a shift that needs to take place in our own mentality. But once you do it and you show an interactive story to a client and you see the light bulb go on, that you picked right. Like an interactive story is, to me, almost always better than just straight up
Yeah.
traditional e-learning. That's just my personal
Yeah,
opinion.
no, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
You're talking about the traditional lecture, PowerPoint, followed by comprehension questions. That's the kind of piece what in L&D we talk about cognitive load, right? When
Hmm.
you move towards that interactive storytelling, it takes that cognitive load off of you. You're kind of going through the piece as an entertainment, and then you're
Right.
learning in the background. It's not so heavy on the brain, and
Right.
because it's chronologically connected, and that's how the filing system in our brain works, it's easy to remember it and walk away and still be able to learn the pieces and connect them together.
Yeah.
So I
You know,
think,
I want to add something to what you just said, because
yeah.
not only from a cognitive thinking perspective, but the real power of the story is the emotional, the affective
Yes.
part. The reason that you watch shows or that you listen to stories is because you care about the character,
Right.
right? They make sure you care about them right at the very beginning. And that is the real reason for the engagement. It's not because you want to learn a lot, it's because you care what
Right.
happens to them. So I think that those two pieces in conjunction are what makes story so powerful, because it addresses both the head and the heart.
Right. Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Um, let's dive a little bit deeper into your recipe, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that's thrown together. It's obviously very strategic, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the video elements, you have the story piece, you have the learning components, right? So if I was to break apart how you put a single interactive story that you've made, like you have a story, you have decision points in there because
Mm-hmm.
it's interactive, you have a call to action, and then in the background you have that running thread of the story.
Right.
What is that secret recipe behind it? Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, so the secret recipe is something that's not obvious from the surface, but it's action mapping. I mean, I use Kathy Moore's action mapping methodology in all of the work that I do, because you have an action mapping, for in case your listeners are not familiar with it, is a methodology where it's completely different than traditional, like, you know, ADDIE type of stuff. You actually are going and talking to, you're interviewing the SMEs, the
Hmm.
subject matter experts. You're really understanding what is their business goal. So it's a focused already on what's the business goal, and then you ask them, what do people need to do to achieve that goal? Not what do they need to know. And that is huge.
Right.
So this interview process is what differentiates the work that I do from, like, you know, kind of, I think, more traditional e-learning. I'm actually, I start out by doing practitioner interviews. I ask these questions: what do people need to do? Why are they not doing it? And then when I get those answers, those populate the decision points. So the good, you know, what you need to do, that becomes the good, you know, right choice. And then the distractors, you know, a couple of distractors in each decision page, those are the why, you know, why people aren't doing it.
Hmm.
And I think it's the fact that the scope of the story itself is limited. You don't have an infinite number of decision points. You maybe have like 4 to 7 would be about, 7 would be the max.
Okay.
So just knowing that when you're going into the conversation, the SME knows I've only got 7 decisions that I'm allowed to work with.
I see.
So it forces them to focus in on what are the most important actions people need to take, and what are the most problematic like distractors or, you know, confusion points for people. So the structure of the story itself is what forces the SME's conversation to focus in and become very, very like, and it's all, remember, it's all targeted towards reaching a business goal.
Right.
So in the end, these interactive videos or interactive stories actually move the business forward towards a particular business goal.
Hmm.
So that's, I think, the key. It's not just like this cool like interactive thing and then people watch it and nothing happens.
Hmm.
You are actually, the C-suite is able to see there's a marked change in behavior or a marked change in results when people go through this type of training, as opposed to, you know, kind of brain dump sort of information dump training. So I think that's also what differentiates it, is that it produces better business results than a traditional methodology might do.
Right. And I heard that you
Yeah.
have the behavioral objectives that are embedded in there,
Yes.
which is what good e-learning, good storytelling is all about, is the behavior change.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
can you dive a little bit into what kind of tools lend themselves to interactive stories? Like I know you mentioned Camtasia. Are there any other
Mm-hmm.
tools in the market that are really privy to this
Yeah.
type of?
So, okay. So for the interactive piece, so this is the decision pages where you come to a place and you've got to make a choice. I
Right.
use articulate storyline,
I see.
360. That's my tool of choice, because I feel it's the most robust. Of course, you have to be able to handle, kind of multiple choice decisions, buttons. And in my case, I usually am using variables to track, what the decisions are that they make. So at the, possibly at the end, you need to give some sort of feedback or a count. It's good to have the variable ability. So that is the tool that I mainly use for the decision points, the over, like that's the structure that holds everything together. Within that, I might either use, possibly storyline characters if I was doing an interactive story, but because I focus more on interactive video, I tend to use Vyond for the animated videos when they're called for. And if it's a live video that's provided by the client, then I'm going to use probably a tool like Camtasia to chop that up and then import just the specific pieces, maybe edited pieces of the movies, MP4s, into Storyline. So in either case, I'm always taking either an animated video pieces or live video pieces that are chopped up. I'm pulling them into Storyline and putting them on separate slides, and then you come to decision point. So that's kind of the way that I do my tools. Camtasia has the capacity for doing interactive video. I talk about that quite a lot on my YouTube channel, because a lot of people can't afford Storyline 360. It's a very expensive product. I mean, it's great, but it's expensive. So Camtasia is kind of like a cheaper way of doing it, because they have hotspots, so you can create interactive videos. They're just not quite as robust as I like. So for my client work, I always use Storyline 360.
Right. And all very well-known, easy to use, user-friendly tools, which is what I love about it. What are the different types? So the big piece of interactive storytelling is the interactive piece, right? Where the learner has to do something. What are the different types of interactions that you have built into your videos or interactive stories?
So I tend to stick with a very simple structure for the interactive pieces. I don't do drag and drops and a bunch of crazy things. There's not a lot. There's no click and reveals. It's just because the decisions are so power packed from a business standpoint, they are very challenging decisions. So when you get to that place, you maybe have had a setup in which the characters, get it ramping up and realizing what the problem is. And then you come to a decision point, which is a static screen. And there's usually 2, maybe 3 buttons on it. And those buttons just very succinctly describe 3 different choices. So at the top, what next? That's that. It's as simple as that. And then the decision, all of the thought that came from those practitioner interviews, and I boiled it down to like 2 lines per button. That's where all of the thinking goes into it. And so then when you get to that decision from the user standpoint or the viewer standpoint, they get to that screen and it's like, dang, I don't know which one to pick. They all sound good. And they have to really think. And then I usually have a timer running with some noise, like ticking clock, right, to step up the pressure a little bit.
Exactly, and the gamification element.
There's a scoring element where it's like how many times you get it right on the first try. You can always try again. Right. But those are the things that's the way that the decision points work. It's pretty much always the same, at least in the ones that I've been creating. I keep it simple because I find when you have too many different types of, from a user interface perspective, if you have too many different types of interactions, it's confusing to the learner. Then they got to figure out how to use this new interaction that you've created with a drag and drop when last time it was a multiple choice. Right. And who wants to have to think about those things when you're in a story? That's the whole point, is like, this is a story. You don't want those interactions to detract from the story or even take you out of the story. It happens in the middle, like a choose your own adventure. You come to the decision point. What do you do? And what you do determines what you see next.
I see.
And I think that's the key. So it's actually simple, but only because I did all that work in the background, figuring out what the decision should be.
Yeah. So talking about all the background work, you mentioned practitioner interviews. How do you ensure that this story or this scenario is going to work for this audience? Because our audience differs constantly, right? So how do you make sure that the story that you're choosing is going to jive with the audience that you're presenting it to?
Yeah, so much of that comes again from that action mapping methodology. I mean, I when I speak, first I talk usually to the SME, who may or may not actually know. For instance, if the SME is a doctor, but the problem is about something that the nurses are doing. So the actual target audience is a nurse in a hospital setting. The doctor, I mean, I would interview them because they might be the SME. They kind of know, what should happen. But then I interview the practitioners who are the nurses. They're the people on the ground. They're the real audience members. And, you interview the best performers amongst that group, the best, maybe the head nurses, the ones who are actually doing the patient work, who can describe to you why things actually are not happening. The doctor might have no idea because he's not actually doing that work. So the key is to actually figure out who your audience is and to talk to those practitioners rather than only relying on the SME, because you want to be grounded in reality.
Right.
And then from that, there's a lot of things that Kathy Moore covers in her book, Map It, where she talks about you from those practitioner interviews, you can distinguish, is this an environmental problem? For instance, in that nurse scenario, the one that she uses in the book, I think it's a fabulous example. She says, if the problem is that the business problem is nurses are the sharps are not being disposed of properly, and so nurses are injuring themselves with sharps. What do you do when you get that injury? Do you pour betadine on the wound? Do you, do you call the helpline, or do you wash it underwater? What do you do? So that's the choice. And the problem is that in the real hospital environment, part of the problem might be that the sharp disposal container is not mounted near the patient's bed. So here's the nurse working with the patient. When they come to dispose the sharp container is all the way across the room. Well, then, there's a good chance, that something could happen.
Right.
And so that's an environmental problem. And you identify that up front during these practitioner interviews. And then that's not going to be solved with training. You can have the best training in the world. If you don't solve the environmental issue, then it will never work. So it gives you the chance. Now you're more of a performance consultant, right? Yes. You're not just an order taker. You're the performance consultant. And as you're having this conversation, you can point out to the doctor or the head nurse, since this is a problem, could you guys take care of moving those sharp disposal containment units nearer to the patient bed? And they take care of that, and that eliminates, say, 50% of the problem right there. So that environmental piece is huge.
Okay.
And then you've got things that are like the knowledge gaps. Maybe they don't know what to do. That can be solved by training, probably. There could be a skill gap. Maybe they just haven't had enough practice disposing of the sharps. That can probably be solved by training. If you have a motivational problem, the nurses do not want to, dispose of the sharps properly. That's a whole nother thing. You might not be able to solve that with training. So I think what I love about action mapping is it solves the problem from a business perspective. But you as an instructional designer, you're only focused on the things that actually training can help. You're not trying to solve stuff that has to be solved some other way. Yeah, the peripheral. It's peripheral to us as trainers, but it's hugely important, probably maybe even more important for the business, for the organization. So I like it. I like action mapping because it's very practical and it actually gets results in a business environment. Instead of just being in an L&D world, it opens your mind to, how can I be a business consultant, performance consultant for this organization?
Right.
And that to me was a light bulb moment. Reading her book really,
yes.
It changed my life.
Training's not the solution to every problem.
It's not. We don't want to admit that sometimes. It's kind of hard to admit, but it's really
But
not.
then when it doesn't close the gap, there are other things that are going on.
Yes.
And what you spoke to was that true front end needs analysis where it's not just the training that you're analyzing, the environment, the technology, the knowledge, the skill gap, everything which goes into feeds into how the decisions and the learning is going to be designed. Let's talk about the characters. You talked about animated characters and you talked about storyline characters. Like, how do you go about designing the characters for a story? Are they inspired by real life people or are they completely fictitious?
Well, let's see. So there's a third type of character, and that is if there's a live video that's pre-existing that the client has. I have one of those on my portfolio where it shows a contractor, working and showing somebody how to do something.
Great.
So that's a live video. So the characters are established already because it's pre-existing video. So the live video is one type of thing where, you are working with the material you have and you're adding decisions to it. But for instance, with Vyond, you can completely customize your character. I mean, you could down to the clothing they wear, you can have it be branded to the brand colors, like match the brand colors of the organization. So generally what I do is during those initial conversations with the SME and the practitioners, I'm in my mind, I'm thinking through, okay, so who should the main character be? And there's one protagonist, because if you have too many, it dilutes the story. So, I focus in on who should that main character be? They should be representative of the audience, somebody they can relate to. And then from there, I, craft a couple of other characters. Usually I have to have a few other characters so there can be some kind of conflict or problem. Maybe it's a direct report. And Vyond is great because they have so many characters to pick from. You can just choose like a couple choices, throw on different jacket colors on them, and just hand it to the practitioners or the SME and say, well, which one do you want? They pick one, and then I build from there.
I see.
So Vyond makes it really easy because it's like, a set thing. And in Storyline, of course, you have a similar thing. They're less customizable, which is okay. But I mean, I tend to like to really customize my characters. So I can't get the Storyline characters to move around. So,
right. Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons that I don't usually work with Storyline characters as much, but you can. And those characters, it's just a matter of having them pick who they want and going forward. I'd say one of the challenges in working with Storyline, though, is that and using the stock characters is that if, for instance, you've built the whole character set, you've built the whole story out, and then they come back and say, I don't like that character, I want to change it. I mean, you hope this never happens,
right?
But it does.
Oh,
and
wow.
I actually, when things like that happen, that's when I'm glad I'm using Vyond, because Vyond has the capability of you saying this character here, substitute it with this character here.
Nice.
Change the color of a jacket. Done. It can be done in like 3 clicks.
Right.
And that's huge. If your story is like, 7 minutes long and you've got like, I don't know, 50 slides, you do not want to be in there like fixing
every
each
slide.
little thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's some advantages in my mind to using Vyond, but Storyline characters can work as well. You just have to nail the people down at the beginning. Say, hey, you choose this thing. That's down. That's in stone. Don't change it anymore. And hopefully they agree to it and you go on.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Another logistical question. So stories also come in different formats, right? So you have the traditional, happy problem solution kind of format, right? Then there's and I'm talking about Netflix, right? So you have Netflix, where a lot of stories start with reverse engineering, right? So 3 hours ago, 5 hours ago, and then they lead up to the main event. And there are several in between. I'm just giving 2 samples, several formats. What are the different formats that you tend to use for interactive stories? Are there certain formats that lend better to interactive stories than others? And what has resonated with the audience mostly?
That's a very good question. So let me think. I think in terms of just the storytelling, you're sort of a creative director when you're creating an interactive story, right? I mean, within the realm, now, of course, it might be limited, like you can't have this thing be more than, say, 7 minutes long. So, you've got to work within that. So you can't have this huge backflash, but you could have a flashback happen somewhere in the story, as long as it fits. So I'd say I don't want to get super you're not Steven Spielberg, so you don't need to have this huge, incredible storytelling methodology. You need something that works to get engagement and to get the behavior change. Right. So for that reason, my stories tend to be more following the hero's journey, where you just start with a character that's having a bad situation of some type. There's some kind of an inciting incident, and then they have they might need a mentor, but they might not. I mean, it depends. And then, you just have your challenges, maybe 4 to 7 challenges. Those are the decision points. And then you've got a happy ending. Now, in that structure, what I just described, that is assuming that you're using what I call a mastery loop, where this is not a branching scenario in its truest form. You don't have 5 different alternate endings. You've got one ending that's the happy ending, but at each decision point, you have 3 choices. And if they choose poorly, in this case, then, you'll see the consequence play out. and then you'll have the chance to make the decision again.
Again.
And then
okay.
you go on to the next decision. So that is what I call a mastery loop structure. That is easier from a developer standpoint to create than to create something that has, say, 3 alternate endings.
Right.
The alternate ending methods, they are sometimes called for and they work, but it requires you to use variables to track what decisions they make. And at some point you need to split and choose which ending you're going to show them. And that is just a more complex version to create. I mean, I could do that. And I mean, I think that there are times that it's called for, sometimes it's not. And generally you want to do the simplest solution that fits.
I see.
Right?
I see.
Yeah.
Another variation of the same format question. You've done a YouTube series or episode on the 10 different types of interactive videos. There's, I want to showcase that. I know you can't go into the depth of each, but just to showcase the entire spectrum of the different types of interactive stories. What are the different types that you have designed or is in the market at the moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. So within, for instance, the types of interactive videos that I design, there are 3 types. There's the live video type, which I described, where there's pre-existing video. There's animated. Vyond is the method I use, and you've got either the business-friendly characters or the more streamlined contemporary characters. And then there's what I call, I actually don't have storyline characters as one of my portfolio pieces. I just don't do those generally, but I could, I guess, if I really had to. But so the third type that I do, or that is done, is custom illustrated stories. Those are fabulous. They look so beautiful because you hire, basically what I've done is I've hired a professional illustrator to illustrate the story. So it has a very custom design feeling to it. You can create any environment that reflects the actual organization because it's being designed by an illustrator. So those are 3 types of interactive stories right there. And then another type would be, I would say there's the parts that are in this is not necessarily in my top 10 list, but it's just a type that I want to mention because I think it's going to be prevalent, is that the ones that are used for marketing, they're more basically, ads, basically, they're shoppable ads. Okay. So shoppable ads is a type of story that is a very small, you're not going to hear that whole story arc. It's a small ad, but it shows some kind of a nice emotional interaction. And then you get the opportunity to purchase what the character is wearing. I buy that guy's coat, right? So although that's not really what, I don't classify that as an interactive story from a training development standpoint, but I want to mention it because I think there are people, maybe your listeners too, who are in the marketing field that need to know that this new type of interactive shoppable ad is going to be huge in the future. That is the way I think that interactivity is going to become the prevalent way that shopping is done. We're so close to it now. So I don't want to ignore that piece. It's just not what I do. But I think that's another piece. There was another one, and this is all coming from, because on my website, I've got this PDF that's like, the 10 top interactive videos, and so one of them was, is not really correct to call it an interactive video. It was really a simulation. But this was something that was created by PepsiCo, and it was during the COVID pandemic when it started out. There was a guy, and he was a Lean Six Sigma instructor, and he needed a way to teach his people, which normally is a hands-on workshop experience. He wanted to have them play through the simulation in which they learned Lean Six Sigma principles. And since he couldn't do that because they were all remote, his son said, "Hey, why don't you do something in Minecraft?" And he mocked up a Minecraft simulation. Like the kid put it together in something like 30 hours. He just put together the thing, charged his dad $100 and said, "Here's this thing, use it." Well, they saw this, PepsiCo saw this and said, "Oh my gosh, we need to use this." So they put together a team that included some professional Minecraft creators and, of course, their Lean Six Sigma team. They put together an entire simulation that is taking place in a customized Minecraft world that is a PepsiCo warehouse simulation thing. And they're all playing that remotely. And that is the way they do their training for Lean Six Sigma now.
Wow.
Wow. Right.
Yeah.
So it's that's a different, it's not really so much a story as that's a human facilitated, because they're actually human beings who are facilitating this. It's a simulation.
Right.
But it definitely has a story element to it. I mean, you're in a Minecraft world, so this fantasy element, and they are trying to get from a beginning point to an end point, and they're facing challenges along the way. But it allows for collaboration to take place too. So they're working together as teams. So it's team building.
Wow.
And to me, that was one of the most fascinating types of interactive video that's out there. It's like this different, collaborative hybrid type of, I don't know, immersive world environment. So that was neat.
Almost like an alternate reality, right?
Almost, yeah. Now, of course, that's not fully immersive. So the other type, I mean, of course, you have, you've got entertainment is a huge field for interactive stories, and you see those. Netflix has the You versus Wild series. They've got Bandersnatch. I mean, you've got more, and that will crop up more and more. But that's purely entertainment. So again, it's not something I do, but it's a type that you need to be aware of, and we can borrow from, learn from. But then, of course, the last area that I think is going to become huge is anything that's using AR and VR.
Right.
And that is because already in the gaming industry, that is a known, accepted way to experience some kind of a story. Now, maybe it's a gaming thing, but it's a very short step away to say, well, then we're going to now begin training, doctors. Well, this exists out there right now, how to train doctors or medical professionals, how to put on and take off, the protective equipment.
Right.
That can be a simulation that's done with VR headsets. You're not actually using up the equipment. You're not using any supplies when they're putting masks on and off, but they're learning how to do it in a simulated environment. And it's completely safe.
Right.
And it doesn't use any materials. I mean, how great is that? So those kinds of simulations, I think, are going to become more prevalent in the future. But I would say for the training and development and the typical training that we do as instructional designers, it's not necessary. I mean, unless you're working within an environment that is inherently hazardous, you probably don't, it's probably okay to stick with the 2D methods for now.
I see.
It's just, there's a little part of my brain that's like, you always got that, shiny object syndrome thing. There's a part of my brain that says, okay, I'm going to keep an eye on that industry. Yes. See what's being done. I follow Betty Danowitz and, Destiny Hildebrand, right? I mean, you want to know what's happening and keep an eye on it. But for the work that I actually do, I'm not producing that material because I just don't think that it's called for in most. And so the cost, the investment from the client is not called for. Right, I won't sell them sometimes more.
And that's more on the expensive end of learning design.
Oh yeah, definitely. It definitely is expensive because the tools will be different and and they're not as well tested out.
Yes.
Yeah. So those are the main ones.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing them. So I'm kind of tempted to kind of dissect your war zone and your confident contractor, if you're up for it.
Sure.
Yeah. So let's start with the war zone. If you were to break it down into different components, because we are seeing once it's all been constructed, we are watching it as this seamless hook, story, interactions, all of it coming together. I want you to kind of pull the curtain behind and dissect the different components of the war zone and what went into constructing it.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So Workplace War Zone, for those that aren't familiar with it, I created it for an organization called EMC Leaders, which stands for Emotional Connection. Okay. And so they have a masterclass that teaches people how to do emotional connection, and it's kind of leadership development. And they wanted a tool that would get the word out about their masterclass. So we created a interactive story, and this happens to be one that's illustrated and also has professional voiceover for the characters. So it's a very full, it's not cinematic in that, I mean, the characters are not moving because they're illustrations, but it has a cinematic feel to it because you actually have characters talking in the video as you play through it. So the way that was constructed, of course, I mean, I did my practitioner interviews, talked to the people who actually are coaching, they're certified coaches within the EMC world. I spoke to them about what are the challenges that they face when they work with their clients, and maybe their clients aren't, what are the barriers? Why do people not want to use the emotional connection methodology? I mean, for one thing, they're like, what is this list of emotions? That sounds stupid. I mean, in their brain, they're thinking this sounds dumb. So when I talked to the illustrator, and I mean, I crafted up the different decisions, I had a great time working with the illustrator because I was able to tell her, okay, so when you come to that decision and the lady's like, the guy this is the boss, he's speaking to his subordinate, Steve is his name, and he's talking to his subordinate. He hands her a sheet that's the list of emotions, which is an actual job aid in the emotional connection methodology. So this is a real thing. And so he hands it to her, and you see this look on her. She's like, and then the speech bubble pops up. What's this for?
Right.
You hear the person actually saying in this kind of sarcastic voice, "What's this for? I don't see how this is going to help."
Yeah.
And that, I mean, they may not actually verbalize it, but people think that when they first see this list of emotions, because generally speaking, emotions aren't allowed into the workplace. I mean, people don't talk about it.
And speaking thoughts, yes.
Right. But if you don't address those emotional intelligence issues or those emotional connection issues, you miss a huge possibility for engagement and for business results. Right. Because people are inhibited because their emotions aren't being addressed. So that's kind of what we're just trying to give them a taste. And I think that's the challenge, is if you play through that interactive story, you're not going to get the full experience of the EMC masterclass. I mean, obviously, it's like it's 2 to 3 minutes long, so there's no way. It's a snippet. It's just enough to give you a flavor for what could happen in an organization if you use this product, as opposed to what might happen if you don't. And in the end, if you like kind of choose the non-emotional intelligent choices, which are typical things like brainstorm solutions is one of the options. Right. And normally you would be like, yeah, I'll brainstorm solutions. But if the other choice was to validate her emotions, the person you're speaking to is upset, you validate, I sense that you're feeling uncomfortable. Do you want to, tell me about that? That's a chance to validate an emotion, as opposed to, hey, let's brainstorm solutions. Right. So if you choose the brainstorm solutions and you choose things like it for too long, at the end, Steve, the boss, loses his job because the project is like screwed up and sales are down and his whole team has quit. I mean, so the consequence at the end of that's an alternate ending. He loses his job and he's like, oh, what did I do wrong? Right. And then you have the opportunity to download a PDF that's about, like, I don't know, 5 tips to, increase your emotional intelligence. And it goes on from there. And eventually leads you to having an opportunity to purchase the masterclass. So that's kind of, and of course, if you do well, he like wins the Employee of the Year award at the end. Yeah. So there's middle ground too. So that was the way Workplace Warzone was. It was a very interesting project because it was different mediums to work in. Yes. Not every client wants that. I mean, you don't have to have voiceover and professional illustrations. It's cool when you do. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the budget also depends on the budget, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So not most clients, they'll look at it and they're like, oh, that looks really cool. I wish I could do that. But then they choose Vyond because Vyond is cheaper. Right.
Yeah. Everything
simpler.
comes pre-built in that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's talk about Confident Contractor, because that was a live video, right? So can you dissect the components of that one for me?
Yeah. So that one, so Confident Contractor it's based around there's a company that has contractors that have to be trained up to meet the standards that the company expects. And so it was actually a regular training video that was produced in which the trainer is working with a new contractor who's come on board, and they are talking through what are the different challenges. And so this is the original script was, what challenges are they facing? How high, when you mow the lawn, this is the situation, to give you backstory on it, is that these are homes that are maybe have been repossessed, and they have to. This company's job is to bring them up to standard so they can be sold on today's real estate market. So it's to enhance curb appeal. All right. So that's their job, and so there's very specific standards they have to meet. The lawn can only be, I don't know, 1 inch. I don't know if it was 1 or 1.5 inches high. The lawn actually had to be a certain level of height. The edges of the lawn had to be trimmed with an edger, not any other equipment. I mean, there were very specific things so you see as you watch through the linear video that was given, that I started with. It's a long linear video, but there are decision points in them that are based around these decisions, these particular types of things that they're training on. So I would stop the video at that point, add in the decision. So, you go for do you use an edger? Do you use your lawnmower? Or do you use your cutting blades? You know, and if you choose incorrectly, of course, it's mastery loop again.
Okay.
And when you choose correctly, it just goes on. So, of course, the challenge when working with live video generally is there's no consequences available, because when they filmed that original live footage, nobody thought about, you know, like what would happen if they just straight through
the whole thing and give it to you.
Exactly. So in those cases, I mean, you have to work with what you have, and I'm not going to like fake out, and, you know, so I just use voiceover narration to give a description as to why that doesn't work, you know, and then just, hey, you know, just basically it's like kind of like, hey, that's not quite right. Try something else. So you just urge them to try something else, and eventually they'll choose the right thing. When they do choose the right thing, it's natural for the story to progress. And I think what was challenging about this video was that when videos come to you like this, they are not a story format.
Right.
I mean, it's a linear progression of operational procedures that need to happen, and someone is instructing someone else. Right. So I had to create a story feeling to bookend it on the beginning and the end. And what I did, particularly at the beginning, that was the most important. I borrowed what Martin Percy, who's a famous director, he's an interactive video director that I follow. So he has a couple of interactive videos that are out there, most notably Lifesaver, and then another one, Real Talk About Suicide. So I borrowed his methods. At the beginning, I wanted to give the person who was viewing it the sense that they were that character, just a little bit of a character, because you know that you're not that character. Right. But you have to let the person feel that they are part of this story somehow. So at the very beginning, you see the interaction between the trainer and trainee, and then I freeze the frame, change it to, I think, black and white. I can't remember how I ended up doing that. And then like focus in on this guy, the trainee. It's your first day on the job. Right. Or it's your first day as a contractor, you know, with this company, and you just make the training instructor. You're feeling a bit nervous. What do? You know, and then it goes on. And so then you've now identified yourself as this is you. You are the person who has to make these decisions. And as you make the decisions, you see your score going up and down based on if you made choose correctly the first time. Right. So there's a little bit of assessment going on, but you know, you're really not penalized for it if you guess incorrectly. So you can make mistakes. You can make mistakes in a safe place, but there is tracking going on in case the company wants to actually track this in an LMS. They can. I mean, I don't think it's necessary. So, you know, at the end, you are told, you know, like you're told what your score is, and you see a rating chart. I mean, you know, green is good. That means you scored correctly the first time on each of those decisions. You scored correctly the first time, you get green. And then, you know, it goes all the way down to red. You know, you didn't score any right. And so then you can give them a call to action at the end, whatever it is the client wants. But yeah, so I think live video is interesting because it really works if the client has already got live video that lends itself to this sort of thing. I mean, you can create any type of training out of live video, but there's certain types that work better than others. And that was a particular one that I thought worked really well.
Right. And that lends into another question is the purpose behind what are some of the L&D purposes for which interactive stories can be used? And it seems like the list is endless. You can use them for corporate training, you can use them for process training, workflows. There's no limitation on it. But I still want to hear it.
Let me think.
Is there
there are,
I'm thinking
I think
software simulation, maybe. I don't know, because there's a lot of software simulations
software
that happen.
Simulation would be one. I mean, you can do basic motivational training. Like, for instance, if the reason that people aren't using the software is a motivational issue, like it's hard to learn, then it makes sense to have a story, because you can show. And that I did that with that other portfolio piece that I have that's for ATD, actually, in which, you know, you've got a new interface that people aren't familiar with, a new tool, and the main character is struggling with a problem of people not doing things well, and then she starts using the tool, and it illustrates the use of the tool. Without getting to a lot of detail in the nitty-gritty of the tool itself, it's more about what happens if she chooses to use it or doesn't choose to use it. So that's addressing the motivational piece, which interestingly is one of those pieces that in Kathy Moore's, action mapping, she kind of doesn't address the motivational piece so much. She says, like, that's up to the client to solve it. With interactive stories, you have the opportunity to solve motivational problems. And that's one of the beauties of it. because it's a story. So when you're done, the people are like kind of motivated to use it because they've seen what happens if you don't. So software simulation, you don't want to train technical stuff because really it's just not worth it. You should just have a screen capture and, traditional training demos. And so the other thing is that this is one of the reasons why my focus tends to be leadership training, emotional intelligence training, communications training, operational training. It's like that sort of stuff, as opposed to, compliance training. I mean, you can do this for compliance training. You can,
yes. There are limitations, yes. You can build a scenario around it. Yeah.
You could build it. And some people there are people in the interactive storytelling community under Anna's environments who do that. They are good at doing this for compliance training. It is not my area of interest or expertise. So I don't do compliance training. That I tell people that right up front. I just don't do that. And part of the reason is because I think that companies just don't value compliance training the way that they value sales training. Because sales training brings in money,
the revenue,
or operational training prevents mistakes.
Right.
So
versus
it's worth
check the box compliance. Yeah.
So it's worth it to pay for these things because from an ROI standpoint, it is totally worth paying for that interactive video so I can get a boost in sales.
Right.
Or so people make less mistakes. Right. That's really important to the C-suite, right? They want that. So compliance training, people will be more engaged when they go through the HIPAA training. I mean, they're like, well, why should I bother? I mean, you've already got something that works. It may not be the best, but that to me is a space where traditional e-learning would be better, more cost effective. That's how I look at it. It's more cost effective to use traditional e-learning for the compliance training. And it's better to use interactive stories where it really can make a huge difference for the business. That's just how I view it.
Right. No, I completely agree with you.
But you could use it, you totally can use it for compliance training, and I've seen it done well.
Yes. So, yeah. You have to just construct a scenario around what the meat of the matter is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Kimberly, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Last question. If there's a client who wants to work with you, or there is a designer who wants to reach out to you, how can they find you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the best way to do it is, I would say, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, first of all, and look for Kimberly Goh. That's spelled G-O-H at the end. But my website is theinteractivestory.com.
Yes.
And I think that you'll probably share that in the description, right? So the website shows my portfolio, and it shows I actually break it down. Like, this is my workflow, the methodology that I use, so you can kind of see those.
Wonderful.
And there's a way to contact me. I've got a let's talk button in the corner.
Yes.
And I'd say the third way to contact me is I have a YouTube channel. This is more for people who are just interested in kind of seeing things that are a little more behind the scenes of how interactive video is created, or if you're just generally interested in what is interactive video. I have a YouTube channel in which I talk about tips and tools for interactive video. And that one, hopefully you'll have the link for that as well, because that's an easy way to engage with just like seeing what I do and maybe learning some tips.
Yeah.
So
I think you're being modest about it. It's amazing. I have to say that YouTube channel it has a wealth of resources. Yes, I will definitely share your website and your YouTube channel in the notes. It's been a true pleasure, Kimberly. Thank you again for taking the time to speak with me this evening.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Redefine Instruction webcast series. We welcome feedback. Leave a comment or question on any of our social media pages. We look forward to hearing from you. Until then, stay tuned for the next episode.